Okay, well, since we're on the hour and we want to make sure that we finish on the hour, I will start. Happy October, everybody. On behalf of the American Institute for Conservation Sustainability Committee, thanks for joining us. I'm Yadine LaRochette, current co-chair of the committee, and this is our 8th of our Conversations with Changemakers, in which we're addressing the environmental impact of buildings in which cultural heritage is stored, exhibited, and studied. Next slide. Today, we're speaking with the collections team at the New York Public Library, which from now on I'll just refer to as NYPL, on how they've managed to both reduce the energy consumption of their 3 very different types of buildings and build stronger communications and collaborations across departments. Some general housekeeping. Please enter questions in the Q&A and not the chat so that it's easier for us to track them. And feel free to comment on questions and upvote votes as you see them important to you. Don't raise your hand because we're not going to see that. And if we run out of time for all the questions, we will get them answered after the webinar and post them on our wiki. So each presenter will be presenting, and then there will be a Q&A at the end. Please only use the chat to share links and reactions. The captioning is enabled, and we are recording this event, and this will be eventually transcribed. All our Changemakers conversations have been transcribed thanks to our wonderful committee volunteers. And so now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Becky Fifield is Associate Director, Collections Management at NYPL. Beginning her cultural heritage career in 1988, she has provided collections management expertise to libraries and museums for over 30 years. Her experience includes working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Becky holds an MA in Museum Studies from the George Washington University. She is an American Institute for Conservation Fellow, former chair and founding member of AIC's Collections Care Network, and has served on the Emergency Committee, Members Designation Working Group, Rubric Subgroup, and Held in Trust Preventive Conservation and Collections Care Task Group. She is principal member of the National Fire Protection Association's Cultural Resource Technical Committee, or NFPA 909. And she's a former chair of the Alliance for Response NYC. So we're so lucky to have Becky with us. Colleen Grant is the Senior Collections Manager at NYPL's Stephen A. Schwarzman Building, which I think we're going to be referring to that building as SABS from now on. Prior to joining NYPL, she was a collections inventory project leader at Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. She holds an MA in Museum Studies with a concentration in collections management from the George Washington University and a BA in Art History from Loyola University, Maryland. She is currently in her 2nd term as the social media chair for AIC's Preventive Care Network. Welcome, Colleen. Now, Deborah Straussman is a senior registrar at NYPL and has worked at the library for 16 years. She worked at the Museum of Modern Art and Exhibitions Administration Department before coming to NYPL, and she holds an MA in Visual Arts Administration from New York University and a BA in Art History and Studio Art from Barnard College. She is an active member of the Association of Registrars and Collections Specialists and serving as the conference co-chair in 2022 and on the conference committee in 2021 and 2023. So, welcome, Deborah. So Becky, if you'd like to start.
Great. Thanks so much, Yadine, and thank you to the AIC Sustainability Committee for inviting us today. So typically when we think about reducing energy use in preservation contexts, we think about HVAC setbacks, recommissioning HVAC units, changes in lighting, improved building envelopes, and charts depicting nice downward trends in energy use. But first, to get there, you have to lay the foundation for collaboration, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to share some wins. But we also want to be clear that we've had a lot of learning opportunities. We've honed our negotiation skills and experienced challenges along the way. Much of the work that we've been doing since the collection management program was established in 2016 is identifying what types of communication models and data exchanges work best to align preservation and climate action possibilities between our teams. At the end of the talk, I'll share some tips and tricks that I find useful for building collaboration. So we share our story today in case it provides you with inspiration, renewed stamina, or pluck to build great partnerships to best join preservation, access, current materials science, and facilities management with climate action opportunities. So first, I'll talk about how we started to pivot from tight set points to creating the foundation for a more dynamic and responsive environmental management program, and how we started to partner with the new energy and sustainability team. Colleen will discuss the learning we had to undertake to connect with peers in the facilities teams. And then Deborah will talk about how we created more open dialogue with curators and exhibition staff and potential lenders around broadened environmental conditions in our galleries. I'll wrap up the talk by discussing some of our recent National Endowment for the Humanities funded work to move toward construction design for collection spaces in which preservation and sustainability are optimized, aligning these goals for future projects. All right, next slide. All right, first I'm going to start with something obvious. We are a library. The New York Public Library is a private nonprofit organization founded in 1895 through the merging of the Astor Library, the Lenox Library, and the Tilden Trust. We are the second largest public library in the United States behind the Library of Congress. NYPL includes 3 research centers and 88 branch libraries across Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx, as well as the Library Services Center in Queens, where technical services, collections processing, conservation, and other functions are located. Our library mission is inspire lifelong learning, advance knowledge, and strengthen our communities. So preservation looks for us looks different than in a museum setting. Instead of controlled, curated encounters in museum galleries, the library's mission is about sustaining personal access to information. And we do this in our reading rooms, online, in our programs and classes, in our outgoing loans program, and in our exhibitions. And our remit is massive. So within the research libraries, we use, care for, and store collections, both general research collections and special collections, across 550,000 square feet. Collections are constantly moving throughout and between our buildings every day as they're served in reading rooms, but also as they are acquired, processed, staged in storage for service, treated, digitized, and prepared for exhibition and loan. So instead of an emphasis on galleries and gallery space, our building's design emphasizes reading rooms, researcher support spaces, meeting and convening space, and massive square footage used to store the collections, both on and off site. And the next slide. As a private organization that receives a significant amount of funding, we have the opportunity to partner closely with the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services, or DCAS, and created a hybrid department with them at NYPL in 2020 to further channel the city's energy use reduction work in our own organization. DCAS leads the city's efforts to reduce carbon emissions from city operations. Given our public-private partnership with the city, this was the beginning of an excellent opportunity to both access funding and resources for recommissioning of existing units, building envelope studies, and replacement of building management systems, or BMSs, and HVAC equipment. The establishment of this team also represented a new group of colleagues for us to collaborate with and learn from. Can I have the next slide? The Energies team is helping NYPL become compliant with New York City Local Law 97, which is a very hot topic here in NYC. And Local Law 97 sets requirements for most buildings over 25,000 square feet. So aiming to reduce emissions produced by the city's largest buildings 40% by 2030 and going net zero by 2050. And as you can see here, NYPL is working toward reducing energy use through a number of projects, including LED light replacement throughout the research centers. That's governed by Local Law 87, and we have to be compliant with it by January 1st, 2025. By recommissioning HVAC, by doing envelope work to shore up our building envelopes, upgrades to our building management systems, summer demand response load reduction programs. That's basically turning back the HVAC at the hottest part of the day during the greatest demand. And investigations into switching some of our buildings from gas to all electric, such as our Library Services Center, where I'm standing today. Next slide. So while NYPL is building net zero designed branch libraries in Staten Island, like this one, with, next slide, with nice arrays of solar panels on the roof. Next slide. It is the research libraries that use half of all energy across the NYPL portfolio, both due to their size, their historic fabric, and due to their many specialized preservation environments. And that only includes the 3 research libraries here. You can see Schomburg Center in the lower left corner, Stephen A. Schwarzman Building. We call it SASB, SASB in the lower right corner, and LPA in the upper right corner. That only includes those 3 buildings. It does not include, that number does not include Recap, which is in the upper left corner, which is our 200,000 square foot, 35-foot high bay storage facility for books and archival containers that we share with several university partners located in Princeton, New Jersey. So each research center has its own history, its own culture, its structure, its tradition. How it's built is different. They have their different collections, and they have different challenges that inform both preservation and our possibilities and strategies to reduce energy use. Next slide. So when I arrived at NYPL in 2016 to establish the collection management program, there was a preservation mindset focused on local actions at the departmental level. We have been working since then to strengthen a unified preservation strategy that activates organizational level resources to improve preservation and address climate change. First, I had to perform an assessment to gauge current care practices and then determine how to build a program moving forward. Part of this was collecting data, documenting risks, and establishing metrics for over 50 storage areas at our 3 Manhattan research centers, which took me over 5 months. And this was only a first pass, how to even begin to grasp this information. Questions I asked about HVAC capability and energy use at that time were only answered based on, 1, the amount of knowledge that I had in order to ask good questions, but also on the amount of trust that I had established with the facilities team and the formation to that point of preservation goals and communication of those goals. And which had been pretty tightly controlled at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, ±2, and 45% relative humidity, ±5 for storerooms. It took time to signal to facility staff that I was interested in their knowledge and their challenges in dealing with our environment. I had to consider how to create common standardized language for the library community about updated preservation goals backed by current research coming from the Smithsonian, the Canadian Conservation Institute, and the Getty Conservation Institute, and the Image Permanence Institute. Next slide. So during these first years, I worked to better understand our HVAC landscape. I learned that we have over 80 HVAC units in the research libraries, and that it includes anything from complex systems integrating cooling towers with component-based systems with steam humidification and specialized filtration, complex specialized units, to crack units, which are called, that's a computer room air conditioning unit, which is a package unit that you could slot into a storeroom. Let's say that's where they're often slotted into in our buildings. But they have less robust temperature, humidity, and filtration capabilities besides creating a fire risk or in your storeroom. to fan coil units. And these are units that just provide heat and cooling in reading rooms, but have no moisture control or filtration capabilities. So there was a perception on the part of curatorial staff that facility staff just needed to make adjustments and change filters routinely, and that proper humidification was available in all collection spaces, and that the system used to work. Staff didn't understand that HVAC and building envelopes have to work in concert and together with the goals of the space, and that they're designed for an environment that is, that is rapidly changing, right? That you can't just make they didn't understand that you can't just make a space cold for preservation reasons for the collection without adequate dehumidification to prevent mold. They didn't understand that increasing available moisture in the outdoor environment was outstripping what our systems were designed and built to handle. They didn't know about the value engineering concepts like ductless returns caused air handling units to pick up additional moisture in mechanical rooms, which outstripped the air handler's ability to dehumidify storerooms, and it was wasting energy in the process. And I like this slide because we get to see our non-mechanical, where we started, right? Non-mechanical HVAC and the photo on the left, and then our chiller plant for the Milstein Research Stacks, which is under Bryant Park. Next slide. So a transformative experience for me was participating in the Getty Conservation Institute Managing Collection Environments course in 2017. This was an intensive course, including 2 weeks of on-site training with the Getty team and 6 months of mentored self-study that supported me in building a vision for change, restarting the stalled environmental monitoring program here at NYPL, and fostering working relationships with building managers at the research centers and learning their challenges. So some primary learning experiences from this course were learning how to explain material science and talk about stress-strain relationships and talk about that in an approachable way to a variety of audiences. I learned to describe the realities and limitations of mechanical HVAC and share with my peers that due to design choices, turning up or down the humidity might not be an option in their area. I was able to make a realistic plan for purchasing data loggers for the now 150 sites we monitor. Mainly that means I was able to strong arm some funds, right? To purchase those and get that going again. And then I created some preliminary environmental goals for storage, galleries, workrooms, and reading rooms, which was improving and clarifying preservation's goals with facilities and capital planning. Now we finally had a target. And then for problem areas, I was able to use all of that new data to perform some analysis. So I'm going to say thank you, Vincent Beltran, for those tools, which you can see some of his work in the resource I'm going to talk about next. And I further developed my arsenal of hard-worn change management skills through learning more about construction design development, when you have opportunities to ask for things and when you don't, systems thinking, and influence strategies, and more. Next slide. So I invite all of you to benefit from the resources that was put together by the Getty Conservation Institute, GCI, for the Managing Collection Environments course. So everyone who was an instructor in that course put together 16 technical notes, and they offer it in this publication as a free download. So topics covered include context and use, physical responses of hygroscopic material to climate, standards and guidelines for climate, comparing like what has been going on, negotiation and consensus building, risk assessment, and more. So I highly recommend it. There's always something to glean from reading it again. So during the time I was engaging in this course, I had an opportunity to hire an introductory collection management team to start an inventory and preservation survey project, as well as provide the initial capacity to deploy preventive conservation strategies in a meaningful and impactful way. So I'm going to turn it over now to Colleen, who was the lead for that original team.
Thanks, Becky. Next slide, please. So as Becky mentioned, I joined NYPL in 2018 as part of the newly formed collection management team. And after Becky's initial work of 2016 and 2017 to establish the collection management department and restart NYPL's environmental monitoring program, we realized we needed to share institutional level goals around the preservation environment to start getting our colleagues from across the library onto the same page. Our need to share knowledge and goals with a larger audience evolved into our ongoing educational presentation series called the Collection Management Connection, or CMC. All research library staff, as well as our colleagues from other departments, including facilities, security, energy, procurement, risk management, and many others, are invited to CMCs to hear us present about program progress, news, and research from the field. And we also use the CMC to introduce a broad library audience to topics including the preservation environment, as well as IPM, emergency preparedness, and more. And we recently interviewed our health and safety director about how our two departments work together around collections, staff, and patron safety. In addition to the CMC, we also developed a one-page resource called Collection Management Notes. And our very first note was on the collection environment, so we could begin to share our baseline goals with staff. Next slide, please. 2021 and 2022 represented pivotal years for our program. We were able to hire 3 new collection managers who took over management of our programs at the Library for the Performing Arts, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and the Library Services Center, which allowed my team to transition to full-time management of the Stephen A. Schwarzman, or SASB Building program. Expanding our team was a game changer in terms of making connections with colleagues across the centers, strengthening our environmental monitoring program, and gaining a deeper understanding of the 80+ HVAC units and the environments that they share for they create for our collections. The collection managers started daily walkthroughs of all collection spaces and established monthly meetings at each building with partners from the energy team, facilities, and health and safety, so we could exchange ideas, address challenges, and share updates on projects that impacted collections and the environment. Our building managers and engineers gave us tours of each building's HVAC units, which often took us into high attics, sub-cellars, and as you can see on the photo on the right, even onto the roof of the SASB building. We listened and learned as our facilities colleagues taught us about the capabilities and limitations of our HVAC units and the challenges that they have in servicing this equipment, as well as the long and storied histories of renovations and replacements over the decades. Through these conversations and relationship building, we learned how to communicate with facilities more effectively and ask better questions, and it has also helped us become more realistic in terms of what conditions we can expect from some of our units. And this has led to more meaningful conversations and progress and has made our complex program more manageable. Beyond these more intangible benefits, this work also produced what has become an invaluable resource, not only for the collection managers, but for facilities and other colleagues across the library as well. If you see on the slide that annotated photocopy of a floor plan, the SASB chief engineer shared that document with us early on in our journey to give us a basic sense of what units serve what spaces. From that document and all of the other work that we've done over the past several years, we've been able to create, next slide, please. This is a screenshot of a database that we have built in Airtable that includes detailed information about each of the 50 HVAC units at SASB that serve collection spaces. So now, not only do we know what units serve what spaces, but we also know where the units are located, what their capabilities and limitations are, what they look like, how old they are, and more. And we have a centralized location for storing mechanical drawings and floor plans. This is a living resource that we are constantly refining and updating as we learn new information or as new units are constructed or renovated. My team and I reference this database every single day, and we consider it an essential resource. For example, we no longer have to go digging through our emails to remember what year was that unit replaced, or does that unit have humidification or not? And we also know, for example, that if we need our engineers to make an adjustment to one of our crack units, our package units located inside of a storeroom, we're going to have to coordinate with them to get them access to that storage room. so they can get to it to update the set points because it's not connected to our building management system. Next slide, please. With all of that as a foundation, we've been able to expand even further at SASB over the past year or so. In a building that is as large and complex as ours, we found that our monthly meetings with facilities, energy, and health and safety weren't sufficient to stay on top of all of the constant work that is happening that impacts our dozens of HVAC units. So the SASB building manager, Eric Maurer, and I now meet weekly on Friday mornings to exchange information ranging from temperature or RH irregularities that my team might have noted on our daily walkthroughs that week, to ongoing HVAC improvement projects that our engineers are implementing, to upcoming city-funded projects that will impact our collection spaces and more. We document everything we discuss and any adjustments our engineers make into the Airtable database so we can tell a rich, detailed story of all of the environmental events, as we call them, that impact each unit at each collection space over time. Our weekly meetings and all of this documentation has become mutually beneficial. We're able to help Eric make sure that any issues and needed fixes don't fall through the cracks as he tries to handle all of the other challenges of managing a massive building. And we are able to rely on his engineering expertise to understand what caused those issues and what work is needed to fix them. Through this collaboration, we've been able to increase efficiency and streamline our communications. For example, curators and librarian staff can now report climate issues in collection spaces directly to collection management, and we can work with the engineers directly to address them, rather than everyone reporting issues to the building manager or chief engineer separately. And it works most of the time. It's still a work in progress. But in general, curatorial staff are able to trust that collection management and the engineers will handle any issue that comes up. And that allows them to direct their energy toward research and serving our patrons. Next slide. We've also been able to build upon our initial outreach efforts from the early days of our department to expand on our initial one-page collection management note about baseline environmental goals that I discussed earlier. We've now been able to share one-pagers with each curatorial division that tells staff in those spaces what to expect in terms of temperature and RH conditions for their specific space, what deviations from those expected conditions warrant contact in collection management, and how to go about doing that. And at our most recent CMC earlier this year, Becky presented a preservation environment refresher to follow up on the first presentation she gave back in 2019 to emphasize our evolving goals and demonstrate all the progress that we've made. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deborah.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Colleen. While the collection management team was expanding and doing all of this excellent work and collaboration, the Registrar's office was continuing to work on exhibitions. In collaborating with the collection managers, especially with Colleen at SASB, we gained a new understanding of how to approach conditions specifically in the galleries. While the library takes great pride in the exhibition program, exhibitions are not our main focus, as Becky touched on at the beginning of this presentation. Really being a library is, and access is our #1 priority, serving collections to researchers. The majority of space is generally dedicated to reading rooms for researchers to use and the public for other purposes. Gallery space is at times secondary, with galleries being carved out or in rooms converted from other purposes. NYPL has focused on RH in collection storage spaces, but not necessarily in galleries or workspaces. And small displays are often inserted into hallway or atrium spaces, often as a way to present timely topics intended to connect with the public who are visiting our research libraries. Our galleries are also all in historic buildings that have a number of challenges. Some of these galleries don't have RH control at all. Some, as I mentioned, are in fact lobby spaces, hallways, and one of them was, until fairly recently, our gift shop. Next slide, please. Our NYPL's leadership sees open space as exhibition opportunities, but these spaces don't necessarily have the tight environmental controls that are really standard in the museum industry. And meanwhile, the exhibitions at the research centers are ambitious in scope, and there's an interest in borrowing. The photo in the center is the space that used to be a gift shop. And the one on the right is our quite ambitiously Read exhibition from a couple of years ago, and Marking Time on the left that had some large scale contemporary installations. We need to work together to protect our own collections while on display, as well as work with lenders to our exhibitions and respond to what may be their expectations. More on that in a moment. Next slide, please. As an example, we wanted to show you the third floor gallery space in the SASB building. The growth of the collection management team and the collection of environmental data and analysis was really key to strategizing about our exhibition spaces. This data really informed conversations internally about what was actually happening in the spaces, rather than relying on staff perceptions about what was happening. We commonly believe that the climate was not stable in the summer in these third floor spaces because it gets quite warm. But the data showed that while temperatures can be warm, the low RH in the winter is actually much more of a concern for us. Colleen and I then shared the graphs with our exhibition team and went over them in person, which proved to be really pivotal in building relationships with our exhibition team. They hadn't seen this data before, and seeing it visually really helped their understanding and improved our relationships because we were being as transparent as possible. And this really informed what we were trying to communicate with them when we were trying to make decisions about what types of items could be displayed in spaces. We're continuing to work with our conservators on the effectiveness of using microclimates and doing research about how this can work in our spaces. And in fact, just this morning, Colleen worked with our exhibitions conservator and facilities to install 2 sample framed works that are sealed in different ways to see how well they can mitigate environmental fluctuations inside the frame packages on this third floor. Next slide, please. So while we navigated the environmental conditions of our galleries for our own collections, we simultaneously were faced with our curators having a continued interest in borrowing work from other institutions or private lenders and having to negotiate incoming loans, often for spaces that don't meet these standard parameters for exhibition galleries of 70 degrees plus or minus 2 and 50% RH plus or minus 5. I found that I was often really stressed because I was concerned about the possibility of having loan requests declined after putting a substantial effort into communicating with lenders and exhibition planning due to a disconnect in what their expectations might be for the climate requirements. We did actually have 1 loan fall through after substantial effort and time. And at that point, we considered another approach. We thought about a document that the Winterthur Gallery Museum and Library sends with loan requests that they had sent to us for an item they wanted to borrow. And we wondered if we could use a similar document to help guide conversations with potential lenders to NYPL. We developed the document on this slide called Exhibitions at NYPL, Environmental Information, and it explains some of the background behind our approach and the specific parameters for the gallery where that particular loan would be displayed. And most importantly for me, it's a tool for communication. It makes it much easier for me to discuss the climate with potential lenders, and it really eased my stress. I send it along with the facility report and loan request right at the start of the process, and I feel much more comfortable knowing that we're being upfront about what the conditions in the space are. Before I started using the document, like I mentioned earlier, loan negotiations could get pretty far before the specifics of the lender's climate requirements were broached. And this approach that we're using sometimes means that we don't get loans, but it's really rare. And generally, the lender understands that we're being transparent about what's realistic, and we're not wasting time trying to navigate situations that aren't sustainable in either sense of the word. We want to make sure that we're upholding the terms of loan agreements and ensuring that safeguarding incoming loan items are safe from damage. And to that end, I also discussed our approach with our insurance broker and insurance company. They recognize that sustainability initiatives are still evolving, and they're also learning and often rely on the institutions they represent to set climate parameters, since we're the people charged with protecting collections for the future. I'm going to turn this back over to Becky now, and thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Next slide. All right, so to bring it all together a bit, I'm going to talk about our current work to integrate preservation and sustainability at the most impactful point, and that's during the construction design development stage. So again, with that over 500,000 square feet in collection storage, reading rooms, and workspaces, the library is often renovating or planning equipment upgrades or conducting studies that allow us to incorporate energy savings into new design projects. At the same time, some of our oldest renovations are from the 1940s. So our renovated spaces are being asked to serve for really long periods of time. And we want to get that opportunity right to both preserve collections, but also intentionally incorporate energy saving design and sustainability. So to better understand how we should begin a storage planning effort, the library applied for an NEH Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections Planning Grant in 2021 to do a pre-planning exercise with Jeff Weatherston, Sarah Sutton, and Jeremy Linden. And there you can see members of our team on the right meeting together with that group. Our goal was to understand some of the pitfalls of previous approaches, considerations to incorporate into our storage planning, and to highlight opportunities for better use of space, both for preservation and for energy reasons, all with a mind toward incorporating sustainability by inviting Sarah Sutton from Environment Culture Partners and our energy, facilities, and capital teams to participate in the project. Findings from this grant project will inform our upcoming collection storage master plan effort that is coming out of our new strategic plan launching in 2025. And I mark this all up to, the conversations that we've been having over the last several years, talking up the centralized goal for doing collection storage master planning in a institutional level sort of way. And in 2024, we received another NEH grant, this time in the Implementation 2 category in the same program, to establish the Collection Spaces Construction Design Standard. The design standard will be a template for construction of collection storage, workrooms, and reading rooms, indicating how optimal preservation design components will integrate with sustainability goals. This project will pull together multiple design experts with cultural heritage expertise to establish ideal design requirements for architecture, room finishes, HVAC, building envelope and insulation, electrical, lighting, fire protection, security, furniture, and more for our different types of collection spaces. We will finish this project in spring of 2026, and we're going to make our work available through a webinar and also with a shareable PDF for other institutions. All right, next slide. All right, so while this short presentation has made the work we've done sound like it happened rapidly, it has really taken some time, energy, and resilience. We've used this effort to bring preservation and sustainability work closer together through honing our listening and negotiation skills, doing a lot of documentation, and learning a lot of lessons from our peers through creating those close working relationships. I'd like to share a few tips that work for me when building bridges for the work we're doing. It's just my toolbox. Just have lunch with everyone. You never know what connections you're going to make, how many people might actually like to hear your message, and who they know. So that's one way to build your message and send it outward. Have your elevator pitch ready to go, have those couple of sentences on your project and what your vision is in case you get stuck in the elevator with the director or your head of facilities or whoever it might be. Definitely keep communicating the big picture. I'll say it myself. I had to go from a museum setting in which I'd been trained to go like, oh no, it's over 45, percent or whatever. It's 55%, panic. Pivot backwards, pivot forward towards what is the big picture that we're trying to communicate. And then also, I think this is a great time to always connect institutional reputation with sustainability. I think the public expects us to introduce, always have sustainability in whatever we're doing. I think that's a great opportunity for institutions to highlight that as well as, do the work. So I would always make that connection. Word exercises. I'm a writer. If one word gets you a negative response among your peers, like find something else. So there's always a way to get your point across, and just keep on trying. So not everyone says yes right away. Not every conversation is a success. Negative feedback can be draining, but no is just a part of the conversation, and it still means you're still working on that conversation. Just know that you are making progress. I highly recommend putting together. I did this other thing recently that helped me to also see where we were going. I put together a then and now table to show myself like how much we've really been doing. So next slide. Here it is. So we went from an environment where in 2016 we didn't have environmental monitoring program. We didn't have a person responsible for the collection environment. Everybody reporting issues to facilities, but no real institutional preservation goal for facilities to focus on. And we didn't have any construction design standards. Everybody was in communicating their own design standards, and there was no way to attain preservation or sustainability goals that way. To where we are in 2024, where we have this network that's collecting this information. That is the language that we use to work with our facilities team to, like Colleen is doing, to optimize our unit's performance, to working with our energy team so they can find ways to reduce our energy use, to our capital planning team who is planning retrofits to the building. It's become this very powerful piece of exchange. There's a lot of other things going on. We're doing envelope studies, chiller replacements. The Schaumburg envelope and windows retrofit is based on our work. So we're working towards better insulation and a more firm envelope there. And yeah, that's just part of it. We have a stacks-wide LED upgrade going on. So it's a lot of different things that are happening. But what I want to emphasize is that this was all built through visioning, engaging with current research, and packaging that for a broad NYPL audience, and connecting our goals with those of an array of facilities, energy, and sustainability and capital planning partners. And we look forward to continuing that conversation with you as we continue the work. So can I have the next slide? I just wanted to offer a quick thanks to the National Endowment for the Humanities for the support of our work, as well as to a number of friends and colleagues helping to inform our practice through their expertise, their research, and their commitment. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Becky, Deborah, and Colleen. This has been a real eye-opener for me in many ways. So I hope that the rest of our participants feel the same way. I do have a couple of questions that I will share with you, and hopefully participants will have, be inspired to please add your questions in the Q&A. One of the things that really stood out to me is that all three of you come to the library, which is, people and information centered, from working in art museums, which focus on art collections. And how has your thinking about general collections care shifted with the work that you've been doing so far on how you see the care for our collections. If you were to go back and work in a museum now, what would you bring with you? Is there one skill or tool that you'd want to incorporate into a fine art collection care system?
You want me to take this one?
Let's start.
Deborah and I were having a conversation about this morning, and I kind of went to a place that I'm not sure many of my art museum colleagues will like, but here it is. You know, so I spent almost 12 years at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I've been caring for cultural heritage collections for a number of years. And I think about what do we value? You have to go back to values, right? You know, in library settings, we're dealing with these very, you know, access to information. But in art museums, you're dealing so much with the aesthetic, right? The experience of looking at a piece of art, and it's very visual, and it's also a very a conservation focused environment in which that happens, right? You know, if there is damage to an artwork, often infills and in painting and humidification and all of these things about conservation are the path forward in order to make that piece whole again for display. And those are the things that require our very tight set points for RH. I think Jeremy Linden was talking to us about an example where I won't name any, I don't know the organization, but he was told that there was a painting on wood that had a gap in it, and there was a great, you know, roar and outcry, but it was during the winter. And during the summer, he's like, wait, don't do any treatment, you know, because in the summer it you know, that panel expanded back in place again. So some pieces are more active. Sometimes I also wonder if we should lean into sometimes damage is part of a piece. And I know that's not exactly what people go to art museums to see, but that's what I thought about, because I was raised in an anthropological conservation context when I went to GW. So those are some thoughts I have.
Great. Colleen and Deborah, do you have anything to share on that?
I can just add about a skill, you know, to the second part of your question, you know, a skill or tool, you know, that I've learned here that I would maybe take back. And I think the biggest one for me, and it maybe is obvious from my part of the presentation, is the valuing and trusting the expertise of others, and acknowledging that this is not something that I can solve alone, or even my department can solve alone, that it takes everyone in the library to play a part. And getting everyone understanding what our shared goal is was a huge step forward. So that collaboration and trust.
Yeah, I see active listening there as a really big part of what all three of you are doing now. Yeah.
And I would just add to what Colleen mentioned, some flexibility. You know, I think one of the things I really like about my role here is there's some degree of flexibility about certain things that, you know, I found to be a bit different than in an art museum setting. You know, I think the other thing just to add is for people who may not be as familiar with our collections, we really have a full range of types of objects. You know, we have more typical book and archival material, but we also have paintings, sculptures, you know, textiles, the whole gamut. So I know some people really know what we have here and some may not. So I think that's helpful to know that we're working with this real variety of materials that all have different needs.
Yeah, that actually surprised me seeing the slides, that there is such a variety in your collection. The other part, which is kind of connected to what you were saying about flexibility and collaboration, is you've each faced adversity and pushback as you've navigated all of these changes. And I'm wondering if you have any pointers onto how to stay resilient when you're meeting this resistance.
I want to emphasize something that Becky said toward the end of her presentation, and I was glad she said it because if she didn't, I was going to. That she often says, and I often take to heart, that like no is not the end of a conversation. Hearing someone that doesn't agree with you or doesn't see what you're trying to accomplish doesn't mean that that is a lost cause. It's just it's part of the journey, and that just means maybe take a break, come back later, rethink how you want to approach the conversation with that specific partner. And persistence and perseverance is the name of the game, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that she also mentioned is language and maybe changing the words you're using. So I'm wondering if you've developed some sort of glossary or terminology that you've found really works and that you have it as a list, or is it just something that you've empirically kind of developed and honed without having it written out?
I don't think I'm that formal, but I know like in some contexts, and this can be a lot related to personal dynamics. A lot of this is influence and managing change for people. And, sometimes words can get loaded meanings that you haven't even been involved in. I mean, conservation world has struggled for a long time, like what does collection management mean versus collection care versus preservation, and that can mean different things in museum context, library context. But sometimes you have to think about where that person is at. If you're trying to talk to capital planning, they don't really care about that as much as, for them, the language is budget, timeline, change orders, when you can make a lot of change, which is upfront during the design development, while it's being constructed, don't pitch a fit then because you're going to make enemies, so
Right.
or spend a lot of money. So it's a bit about context. So I don't have a firm glossary. Might be a good idea,
Right.
but
Well, that
I
makes
don't think
sense.
so.
Yeah. Well, and not just the context, but the person involved. I'm sure that
Yes.
there's like you mentioned, both from their skills, experience, and just personality. I love the Airtable. Oh my God, that just was so beautiful. I'm just wondering, did you, Becky, when you first started out with looking, assessing the entire system, did you work with a specific model to assess, or did you kind of start from scratch?
Yeah, I did. I pulled from the benchmarks in collection care, which is it was originally composed by the Council for Museum, Libraries and Archives in the UK. They're known as Collections Trust UK now. And this was a list of questions or conditions in that let cultural heritage people assess what is the level of preservation in their facilities and allow them to make decisions. The original benchmarks didn't have a score assigned to it, so I assigned some indexing scores that allowed us to allowed me to create some really great charts about how our different storerooms fared and be able to show that to a library audience, which that was pretty gutsy. I should do that again. That was pretty fun. And it did generate some activity towards us getting rid of some of our worst storage areas. During the pandemic, we emptied a whole building. So that is where I got that. It involved a lot of other criteria, not just environmental criteria. It involved like routes to storerooms and furniture and all that kind of thing. But it was a place to start, and I recommend it. And because it's a UK resource, if you want it in Welsh, I just found that it's in Welsh too.
Oh, come on. I think we have a question. Kisuk, do you want to?
Yes, there is a question from the audience, some practical application intention I already see. Are you able to share a PDF or the loan document that you discussed regarding maintaining environmental conditions, or is it available on the public library website?
Sure, I'd be happy to email it if I'm not sure who wrote in the question, but my email's on the screen. I'd be happy to email it to them. And also if they have any questions about it, to talk about how we're using it. I'm a big fan of being as transparent as possible, which is why this document has been so helpful to me in conversations with colleagues.
Thank you, Deborah.
Great. One of the other questions that I had for all of you really is you've learned a lot about HVAC systems. You've become quite expert at HVAC systems. And I know you learned, on the job and with some training as well outside. Is there one specific source that you would recommend for a novice that wants to learn more about how all these systems work? Or specific, or any just resource in general that we could share on our wiki?
Well, yeah, I would definitely share the Getty's Managing Collection Environment technical notes, because Jeremy Linden writes, has a technical note in there and describes different components within systems. It's not everything, but I mean, it's a start to understand. I mean, it's kind of amazing. And I have to say, like, mechanical engineering, I probably didn't even know it existed when I went to college and
Right.
barely grad school. But now I can talk fairly confidently about different types of filtration and cooling coils and outside air, return air, so different components of the system that will matter when you're having conversations about how preservation and energy goals align.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victoria Binder actually makes a really good point that IPI has some really great resources there. Thanks, Victoria. That's a really good point. All right, well, we're nearing the end of the hour. I don't know if anyone else has any other burning questions. I don't see anything else coming up. So I just want to thank you all for this really great talk, which will be we are recording and will be shared post the event. And we want to just thank Nick Farrell over at AIC for managing the slides and being such a good partner and getting all this set up. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending. This has been really fantastic. And I'm looking forward to getting to hearing more about what you guys end up doing with the webinar.
Yeah, and I just added 2 more further readings that recommended by the presenters. So hope you can check that out too in the chat.
Thank you, Kisuk.
Welcome.
Fantastic. All right, well, have a good rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.